15 minutes for those opposed. And the clerk is going to flip a coin to say which group goes first. I believe there was a children's presentation as well. No, they did not appear. They're not here? Okay. And they weren't able, thank you. Okay, that's why we extended it another 5 minutes, but since you're planning on that, we'll go ahead with that. Does our clerk has got her best quarter out here? And let's say heads will be pro and, or she's gonna call it, okay. Yeah, we will do that afterward. What, what is it? Okay. Tails. So we will start with against. So if you have come to speak against, now, since this is an agenda item, yes, okay, do we have speakers who are against marijuana? Actually, it would really be more directed to it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Do I have speakers against marijuana or wish to speak to that, the sale of marijuana in our city? And your name, please, and address.
Yeah, Rebecca Van Vliet, 3837 Balsam Street. I'm a voting resident of Wheat Ridge, an advanced practice nurse at Lutheran Medical Center, and most importantly, a concerned parent of 2 young children who will be soon attending school here in Wheat Ridge. Recently, through the work of the group Parents for a Healthy Colorado, I've been made aware that this city council has welcomed the marijuana industry into our city with open arms. It seems to me this violates the spirit of Amendment 64. We are no longer talking about the decriminalization of private citizens using marijuana for medical or recreational purposes in the privacy of their own homes. We are entering the dangerous and uncharted territory of welcoming a big business for-profit industry that promotes and normalizes a dangerous mind-altering substance right into our backyard. To me, it takes a very little amount of studying to realize that the marijuana industry is following the marketing strategies of big tobacco and targeting the most vulnerable members of our community, our children and teens. Take edibles, for example. Marijuana infused into gummy bears, Fruity Pebbles, and the like. Tell me that is not designed to appeal to youth. Yes, adults love the convenience and fun of getting high on gummy bears, but it is blatantly irresponsible to put drugs in children's candy. How can the industry pretend that teens, the next generation that they rely on to become addicted, are not the targets of edibles? I urge you to carefully consider the far-reaching implications of allowing this drug industry a foothold in our city. Research has linked marijuana to low birth weight, permanent IQ loss, mental illness, poor job performance, and an increased incident of motor vehicle crashes. As a healthcare professional, I can tell you our next generation already struggles with many of these issues. Can we afford to risk their future even more by making a drug linked to these negative outcomes more available, socially acceptable, and enticing? As elected officials, I believe you have a definitive responsibility to our children to consider how we can stop the wheels that are already in motion to welcome this industry and its sequelae into our city. Tonight, we are again asking you to take action to limit the spread of the marijuana industry in our city. Thank you for your consideration of this issue and for your service to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. I am timing the whole discussion tonight, so therefore you have 15 minutes for it all. And it doesn't matter, somebody's 5 minutes and somebody's 10 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever. Could I have the next speaker, please?
Hello, I'm Connie McCoy. I live at 3475 Estes Street. I would like to comment on the marijuana moratorium. The city needs to make it permanent. We also need to ban all edibles. The grow facilities pollute the city with their smell. The council made a huge mistake when they only took 2 minutes to decide to bring the drug dealers into our city. They don't live here in Wheat Ridge. They use our city as a dumping ground. They can call themselves entrepreneurs, businessmen, or women, but they are drug dealers, plain and simple. No research was done on the impact it would do to our community. Students from Prospect Valley Elementary are doing the research on marijuana, which is wonderful and should have been done by our council members. Hopefully, they will be at our next meeting. These children are the leaders of tomorrow, and I bet they'll do a great job and make good decisions. You don't think it affects our youth knowing it's in our city, but it does. The council is chosen to protect our city and its residents, especially the children who are growing up in the community. Now is the time to backtrack and make the right decision to ban marijuana, edibles, and grow houses in our city. It can be done, especially with the ban of edibles. That's left up to each city, not the state. The city is also getting a bad reputation. Our city was always known as a city to live in and raise a family, not grow marijuana in. We are counting on you to make the right decision and ban all marijuana edibles, grow facilities, and eventually all marijuana pot shops. We need to get back to having a wholesome, healthy city, not a marijuana city. When the decision is made by our council, we will know then who they are working for, the citizens of this city or the marijuana industry. I hope it's not the marijuana industry, but we'll find out at that time. The moratorium needs to be permanent and the edibles need to be banned. We have other businesses to hopefully bring into our city. We don't need pot shops. Some businesses might not want to come in here because of that. Do you think Sprouts will want to come into this city knowing there's a marijuana grow house a block or so away from where they're going to build their store? I doubt it. Have you even let them know the possibility? I don't think they will want to smell the stench every day, or their customers won't either. Sprouts will bring a lot of revenue into the city. The 38th and Miller Grow site needs to be banned permanently. It's not healthy for anyone in that neighborhood or the dental office a block away. And on another subject, we really needed 2A for our city's upgrading streets, parks, etc. Both 2A and 2B were defeated. Think about that. Citizens of this city are not trusting the council to make good decisions, especially since it was not put to a vote of the people of this city to make a decision on whether or not to have marijuana in our city. Something that important to this community was taken away from us. It's made a lot of citizens angry to learn what has happened regarding marijuana. Again, a poor decision not to get citizen input or to put it to a vote. You disrespected the citizens of this community by not informing them about allowing this industry into our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Jay, council members, my name is Roger Morin. I live in District 3. Mayor Jay, you wrote me several weeks ago recommending council discuss city-sponsored tours of each type marijuana facility in Wheat Ridge. I do hope you discuss that tonight. I submit an unsolicited citizen report regarding Wheat Ridge's marijuana demand and request council include it as an exhibit to the study session. The report concludes this year, 14% of Wheat Ridge residents will permissibly consume 1,700 pounds of marijuana. 4.3% of Wheat Ridge residents will permissibly use marijuana over 20 times a month and consume nearly 90% of its permissible demand. 5 marijuana stores, each with 5,000 square feet grow operations, would generate an estimated 10,500 pounds of marijuana, a 600% excess. And that's not counting import of edibles and plant stock. Wheat Ridge only needs 3,500 square feet of grow operations or 1,500 pounds of marijuana, which correlates to 1 store. Council, unless you significantly curb marijuana supply, citizens will want more information on why you allow such significant excess of a commodity with so many liabilities.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Clayton Trapp. I live in Wheat Ridge at 4753 Robb Street. I come to you today, Mayor and City Council, as a concerned citizen. My wife and I are graduates of Wheat Ridge High School in 1977. And back in the day, Wheat Ridge was known for growing carnations. Had the mascot as Farmer as the Wheat Ridge High School mascot. Still does to this day. It is a bedroom community, a lovely place to live. We have lived all over the country since finishing our graduate school work and have moved back here 5 years ago. We have raised 6 children, have 7 grandchildren, and I'm a little bit dismayed at City Council. Some people would say I'm angry, but I think that's just my appearance. That has nothing to do with my attitude. My master's degree is environmental planning, and I've helped cities across the country deal with issues from telecommunications to dealing with fracking issues and all sorts of things. I've never had to deal with marijuana issues because I've never had to deal with marijuana issues. Here I do have to deal with marijuana issues, and the thing that upsets me the most is that City Council saw that they did not need the input of every citizen, and they allowed for pot industry to come in. And I'm not demanding an answer, I just want you to answer in your hearts. Why was that? Why is it that we had Golden turn down pot? Why was it we had Arvada turn down pot? Why was it Lakewood turn down pot? Why is it that Wheat Ridge, a bedroom community that is much smaller than these larger cities, has hitched their wagon to the MJ industry? Now, I'm a libertarian. I don't care if people smoke pot. I could really care less. But I'm also a Christian. I don't drink, I don't smoke pot, I don't take drugs. I could care less if other people do. But if they're on my property, if they're in my neighborhood, then I've got a little bit of a problem. I just need you to understand that you have circumvented the very voices that have put you in office. You did away with our opportunity to have public comment. It's very important that we get to speak on such an important issue. Now, on the back end, you demand from us that we either do one of two things: have a referendum, which we can only do in 2016, to remedy part of the situation, or that we recall you. I don't like recall because I think it's very political, but now you've put us in the position of having to do that. Why would you do that? I don't know any of you personally, but I have read some of the comments in some of the City Council memorandums and minutes. It was said by somebody named Tulio. Now, whoever that is of you, I don't know who that is. But they said that pot shops should be as common as barber shops. Well, what in the hell is going on with barber shops? There's 150 of them in Wheat Ridge alone. Do we need that many pot shops? Why is it that this was passed through and we now have an administrative review on locations like 38th and Miller when it should actually go before the members of the City Council on Planning as something that's either detrimental to the growth of Wheat Ridge or not? But we, the citizens of Wheat Ridge, need to have your respect. We respected you enough to vote you in. We can disrespect you enough to vote you out. Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton.
Kelly Brooks. I live at 4100 Dudley Street. Thank you for coming tonight, Madam Mayor, City Council. I'd like to thank you for setting aside this time to address community concerns regarding the role retail and recreational marijuana should play in our community. And I encourage you to continue this dialogue into the future. Evidence continues to mount that the commercialization of the marijuana industry we are witnessing is not what the citizens wanted and not what we voted for. This past election, 7 more communities which had originally voted for Amendment 64 have elected to keep retail marijuana out of their cities. Lakewood, Canyon City, Palisade, Palmer Lake, Paonia, Ramah, and Hot Sulphur Springs have now joined over 200 other Colorado communities who have chosen to put the health, safety, and welfare of the public before marijuana profits. These results, combined with a recent Suffolk University USA Today poll, which concluded a majority of Coloradans would vote against Amendment 64 if they were to vote today, is overwhelming and undeniable. To me, it's not just about limiting accessibility. Sure, we can limit or prohibit retail marijuana in Wheat Ridge. Kids and young adults can and will cross the border into Denver and Edgewater to access it elsewhere. I'm not naive to that. However, to me, this is about a cultural shift in our societal perception of an addictive, psychoactive, and detrimental drug. Through the commercialization and normalization of marijuana and irresponsibly referring to it as medicinal and recreational, we as a community are contributing to an evolution that will desensitize entire generations of youth. While in contrast, hard, reliable scientific evidence continues to mount that use causes irreversible damage to the brain in a host of ways, especially in those under 25. Do we as a community want to facilitate this regression or encourage it? Again, thank you for your hard work and effort on this topic. I trust that council will do the right thing in the best interest of your community, schools, and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. We're down to a minute now of the first 15 minutes. Does somebody want to speak for a minute, or are we ready to go on? Okay. Run.
My name is Mary Fedge. I live at 3465 Estes Street. And I look at it as you have basically put in place 5 drug dealers. They will basically eventually pool their money. They will buy the most expensive lawyers in town, and they will pretty much own our city. You have an opportunity now to put some restrictions on this industry, and I encourage you to do so. Because otherwise, in 2 years, 3 years, they will do whatever they want, and you will not be able to stop them. So I encourage you to take this opportunity, do what you can, and save our city from them owning it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have someone now who is supportive of the marijuana sales in our city? Yes?
Howdy, Kevin Iden, live on the border there on 49th, grew up in Arvada, retired high school teacher, dealt with veterans and disabled folks since I've been 16 or 18. Certainly respect what you're saying. I'm a libertarian, I'm a follower of Christ myself. What that has to do with this issue, I'm not quite sure. I would have concerns concerning the children and everything like that too, if I felt it was valid. Just put this out right now. The big concern I wonder, I'm sorry? Yeah, absolutely. A big concern I have, when I pull off right the charts that we're here so worried about this for the last 7 years, right about there at 43rd and Kipling, the Old Lord's Table restaurant, there's been a massage parlor place running 24/7, just went up for lease. But as you head out today, you can hit 44th and Wadsworth, go 1 block down. There's another one over there, runs 24/7. Work with a lot of veterans, folks. And you're concerned about medical marijuana places. Options is it's a small family business. The Ridge, pretty much the same. You're making it sound like this is a conglomerate of 300 people. A lot of towns shut it down, some didn't. Would like to see Wheat Ridge would be forward. Talk about drug dealers. Talk to me about Jefferson County mental health. Over the last 2 years, I've seen a lot of folks off a lot better now than the psychotropics that they were giving them at Jefferson County mental health. I heard the study from the nurse. Would love to see the study. We could talk about that forever. Hate the way they market some of it. Mike's Lemonade with alcohol. Again, in my years of being a teacher and also being a drug and alcohol counselor, alcohol, worst case, violence. Marijuana, worst case, 16-year-old boy gets stiffed at the door because they fell asleep, didn't pick up the Domino's pizza. Honestly, we had magazine services up here. For 25 years, they were running one of the biggest scams, if not the biggest scam, according to the DA, concerning selling magazines. I worked up there with a lot of guys that were on probation and parole. That place was a mess. I argued for years about that, never heard a thing. Metro News Service, the same thing. By the way, that school down there by the massage parlor off of 44th and Wads, that school is only about 4 blocks away. Much more concerned about that. You know, it's a forward, open-looking city. We started with agriculture. I think this is absolutely ridiculous. I cannot tell you how Options has helped out the veterans around here, whether we do not have to run to Denver. We're on limited funds. And all the time I've seen options, I've seen lines of 30-plus people. Some of the best conversations I've had in the last year. Have never seen any violence or anything like that, even compared to like a Nuggets game or anything like that. It's been a boon for Pietro's Pizza. And I'll tell you what, it's been a heck of a thing for the folks out here with disability. Appreciate what you're saying, but folks, it's the wrong case. Let's go after some stuff that's really important. Sure, let's keep it away from the kids, but we keep alcohol away from kids. We keep, hopefully, pornography or things like that away from kids. I think we can handle keeping marijuana away from kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey. I had not announced that earlier, but this is really a study session, and we do not encourage or allow clapping or cheering or et cetera. I know it felt good, but for you and for whomever, but please be respectful of the council members. Do we have anybody else who would like to speak in positively about marijuana? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council.
Name.
My name is Samantha Walsh. I am a representative on behalf of Options Medical, a dispensary within your city. And first, I would like to thank and applaud council for their due diligence on this, their thoughtful consideration. This is obviously a very passionate issue for members of the community. And I would like to show how many people are in favor. As you can see, council, there are over 40 people here in support of Options Medical because it is a family-owned business. They give back to their community. These are good business owners who pay taxes, adhere to the most stringent regulations in the entire country. They are diligent. Almost every single penny of profit, if not put into not only their employees' health insurance benefits, retirement packages, paid sick leave, things like that. Things that are good and beneficial to the community. They are pouring right back into their business to adhere to these very thoughtful regulations. They are compliant. They do things to be energy efficient. They do things to give back to the community. They are quiet. They don't make a ruckus. They don't advertise. They don't, put flyers out for everywhere. They don't have flashing neon lights. This is a good business. And while we're very, thoughtful of the neighborhood, there are also very many positive benefits that have happened since the vast majority of Coloradans voted for Amendment 64. This has received more votes than President Obama. This has received more votes than any ballot initiative in the history of Colorado. It is a very passionate issue. Crime rates have gone down. DUI fatalities have gone down. In cities that have actually opted into legalization, teen use has gone down. What we've seen is the industry has been working with the state and other regulators to not only finance a public education campaign regarding edibles, but they have taken progressive steps forward to minimize the dosing to 10 milligrams. This has been a very responsible and thoughtful industry. We're thankful for council's consideration. We think that everything laid out within the ordinance that has been brought forth by Councilman Pond is very thoughtful and is very considerate to the industry, and we're supportive. So thank you. 5913 Pierce.
Thank you. Additional speakers on the pro side?
So my name is Amelia Armstrong, and this is Alan, my boyfriend. And we live in Lakewood at 464 South Salisbury Street. And I can really only speak for the character of Sandy and Greg. I recently moved to Colorado for medical marijuana because I have a brain tumor.
It's okay. We're with you here.
Yep. So upon making the decision to move to Denver, which was not easy, because I had to leave much of my family behind, Sandy was completely helpful in meeting with my mom and I and giving me a tour. And she wasn't so sure about cannabis. I mean, there's lots, and I wasn't either. So clearly, I needed to be sold on it. But Sandy and Greg have just been remarkable. And not necessarily because they think they're going to make money off of me, but I feel genuinely like they care about me and they care about my health. Would you like to add anything?
No, they've been a godsend. This has been a real labyrinth to try and get to the right strains and the right extracts, and without them and their guidance and leading us to professionals and the people that can actually help us, this would have been a lot harder. So we're thankful to have them, and I think demonizing them as drug dealers is misplaced. It's not really who they are. They care about the community. They care about the people in it, and they're not going after kids. They're helping people, real people. So cut them some slack.
Thank you very much. Good luck. I'm sorry. Oh, got it. Okay, any other speakers in support? One more? And please do address your remarks to the council. Got it.
Hi, my name is Austin Dardano, 3500 Miller Street. I've lived in Wheat Ridge my whole life. Since I was adopted as a baby, and I just want to say that there has been plenty of drugs and marijuana in this city since long before it was legalized. And I know from personal experience growing up here, I've been around it, and as far as other drugs aside from marijuana go, I have seen a very large decrease in that since we have opened up dispensaries here. I know a lot of people who come actually from pretty far just to go to places like Options because it's just a great store. And I don't know, somebody over here mentioned something about edibles and getting rid of edibles, and I personally have never seen anybody under the age of 21 with edibles like gummies or something like that. Maybe people were making pot brownies in their house, but that's been going on forever. And I don't, most of the people who I think use edibles are the people who are older, who don't smoke, or who can't smoke, people with actual medical issues. And because if a kid's trying to get high, they're wanting to get high. They're wanting to smoke, they're wanting to hang out with their friends. They're not wanting to just eat something. And I don't know. I think that these businesses here are not causing trouble. They're not in the way, I guess. If anything, they're creating revenue. They're bringing money in my opinion. That's about all I have to say.
Thank you, Austin. There's about 3 more minutes. Do we have someone else?
Good evening. My name's Jessica Jackson. I live in Golden.
I'll pull that microphone a little closer. And we want your address, please.
My address is 17470 West 10th Avenue,
In Golden.
Golden, Colorado.
Okay?
I come to Wheat Ridge to buy the medicine that I need because it is medicine. It's not drugs. I'm not looking to get stoned.
A little closer.
I'm not looking to get stoned. I'm not looking to get high. I'm looking for medical relief from fibromyalgia. And Golden doesn't sell what I need, so I come here. And in spending money on the medicines I need here in your city, paying taxes to your folks, and then going out after buying the medication I need for later on in the day because you don't take it while you're driving, I stop at your stores. I purchase your foods. I pay your city taxes so I can buy my clothes and everything else I need while I'm out running around. And I don't mind paying your city taxes to get the things I need because my city won't. I do a lot more shopping in Wheat Ridge than I do Golden because you have more of the items I need. Keep that in mind.
Thank you. We're about out of time. We have maybe a minute left if there's anybody else. Okay, it looks not. It looks like we can move on.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
could I just ask all of the people that spoke, make sure that you put your name on a sign-up sheet and it's clearly legible so I can spell it to put it in the minutes?
Do we have anything back there? No, we don't. Do we? All right. Okay. Let's move on. Staff reports, that would be something other than the marijuana discussion later on.
We don't have any.
You don't have anything else? And I'm going to ask for elected official reports. This would be for committees you belong on or something else that you would like to discuss that's not in regard to marijuana discussion tonight. Do we have any of those?
I think I can make a quick update about the Wheat Ridge Housing Authority.
Okay, thank
So
you.
we have our last property in the process of going to bid for renovations. It's off of 44th Place, right near the Hopper Ridge Park. So it'll be a wonderful addition with the upgrades and close to a new park for family members, hopefully new families to move into.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe then we can move on to the main discussion tonight, which is, of course, the marijuana moratorium. Ken, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'll kick it off and then hand it off to Carmen, who's going to speak to the bulk of the draft ordinance that we've presented to you. It's been kind of a team effort at a staff level in terms of participation from my department and the police department and city manager's office, but Carmen had the task of actually putting that into a draft ordinance that we could all give her feedback on. But just by way of a little bit of background in terms of where we are in this process, we have had a moratorium in place, most recently acted upon by City Council on August 18th. That was an emergency ordinance at the time. It's since been extended so that the current moratorium was extended after a public hearing on October 27th for an additional 120 days after the emergency ordinance expires on November 17th. So the moratorium as it stands is currently in place until about mid-March, giving council an opportunity to give some thoughtful consideration to the existing regulatory environment as it pertains to both retail and medical marijuana, and have the kind of discussions that we're having now. City Council did have a study session on September 22nd and provided some preliminary direction as to some options that they'd like to consider in terms of an ordinance, and we've done our best to take that policy direction and craft that into an ordinance for you to consider preliminarily this evening, potentially at additional study sessions if necessary, and giving us several months into 2015 to then potentially consider moving forward with first readings and public hearings on the actual ordinance. As I noted, it has been a kind of a collective effort at a staff level, and I'm going to ask Carmen to kind of go over some of the highlights of the substantive comment of the ordinance that we've drafted for you this evening.
Oh, thank you. I'm now on. As Ken mentioned, it's really been a collaborative effort to put all this together, and I appreciate all the input and feedback that staff has offered. And we have attempted to craft for you an ordinance that reflects the policy direction as we heard it. You, I trust, have from me in your packets not only the ordinance, but sort of an executive summary of that ordinance section by section that sort of explains what each section does. Because the ordinance is ordered in the same, numerically by code section. Not all the policy goals are done in one section, and so the ordinance sort of jumps around in terms of what it accomplishes, as does the memo, because I wanted you to be able to track that. But what I thought I would do for you here tonight is, and for those folks listening, address sort of the major policy goals that are addressed in the ordinance, and then touch upon a few policy issues that we have not included in the current ordinance, and explain why, and then see what feedback you have. So about 7 major policy issues are addressed and contained in the ordinance. The first is to establish a numerical cap on the number of establishments that are currently, that the numerical cap would be consistent with the number of currently existing or pending establishments. And those numbers are 5 for storefronts, whether they be retail or medical or co-located. And that number is 3 for manufacturing facilities. So this ordinance reflects that hard number cap on those different kinds of establishments, and a process by which, if one becomes available, the city would determine which applicant or how to process applications for that one available spot. And essentially it's a first-in-time formula that we think is both fair and easy for everybody to understand. Second major policy goal reflected in the current ordinance is to designate, again, storefronts, whether they be called medical centers or retail stores or co-located facilities, but the places where people can walk in and buy marijuana, to designate those storefronts as special uses in the C1 zone district. Currently, under the city's code, those uses are permitted in the C1 zone district. Per council's direction, this ordinance designates them as a special use. It also employs and refers to the existing special use review process to consider applications for those special uses in the C1 zone district, which currently is a sort of a big overview. Before an application is submitted, there's a neighborhood meeting requirement. Then an application is submitted, then notice is provided, posting of the property notice is provided to adjacent owners. And it is an administrative process at the community development level for special uses, again, generally, and as in this draft for marijuana businesses, unless a written objection is filed concerning the special use, in which case it then becomes a public hearing process at council. So staff thought, at least as an initial go at this, we would include that ordinary special review use process as the one that would be employed here. A couple of differences in the ordinary special use process that are stitched into this ordinance that would be particular to these marijuana stores is the expiration period. We heard direction that rather than a year of dormancy leading to expiration of a special use permit, that it was more appropriate to have a shorter time frame. This ordinance therefore contains a 6-month provision. If a store as a special use in the C1 district becomes inactive for a period of 6 months, it would then expire. A new application would have to be made to have a store at the same location again. Another difference in what is in the ordinance for these marijuana special uses as compared to ordinary special uses is that under current code, special uses can either run with the land, be perpetual, and when transferred, when property is transferred, the right to use, put that use could also be transferred. This ordinance reflects that that option is not available for marijuana special uses, that those shall always be individual to the applicant who obtains them, that any proposed transfer of those special uses be administratively reviewed and approved by the city. Third sort of large policy issue addressed is some sort of limitation on size of cultivation activities. In the ordinance, cultivation activities are limited to 5,000 square feet total. And under current code, just as a reminder, And nothing is proposed to be changed under this draft. Under current code, cultivation activities, remember, must be contiguous to the same licensee's store or manufacturing facility. No standalone grows, no large cultivation facilities that just exist standalone. Fourth policy issue, another separation requirement. There is a 1,000-foot separation requirement in current code for establishments in regards to schools, daycare centers, college campuses, drug and alcohol treatment facilities. What is proposed in the current draft is an additional 1,000-foot separation requirement that is applied to, again, these storefronts, whether they're centers or stores are co-located. From them, an additional 1,000-foot separation requirement to the rec center and to what we have called improved city parks, the idea being that those parks that are truly designated parks with playground equipment that would maybe frequented by children and families, those kinds of city facilities under the current draft would have an additional 1,000-foot separation requirement from stores, not green belt, open space, undeveloped land that has not yet seen its true park development. Those are accepted from this separation requirement. In relation to separation requirements and distances, staff began a discussion about the ways in which distance is measured. Under current code, for a few different reasons, there are different ways to measure separation requirements. Staff has therefore encountered, the unenviable task of not only figuring out separation requirements, but how they're supposed to be measured in this particular instance and how it's supposed to be measured in another particular instance. Because of that, as a part of this ordinance, staff recommended taking the opportunity to make all the measuring methods uniform. And what was thought, at least as a starting point for discussion, made sense was as the crow flies, or direct aerial measurements, straight line, and to go property line to property line. So that's what's contained in the current draft. Next major policy issue is addressed by the ordinance is to permit existing facilities to co-locate. That is, if an existing facility is currently only for retail marijuana or for medical marijuana, to permit that facility to add the other kind of marijuana to their current locations, even if a current existing location becomes a legal non-conforming use under your new regulations. So I think what we heard, the policy rationale there was look, if the activity is very similar, whether the inventory is medical marijuana or retail marijuana, the land use impacts and the impact on the community is probably going to be pretty similar if another kind of inventory is simply introduced. And that, council, we heard you wanted to be able to permit folks to add sort of the other kind of marijuana to what they already do if they're already licensed. Legal non-conforming uses cannot expand, add to their facilities, have site modifications, and maintain their legal non-conforming status. So permitting them explicitly in this ordinance to simply co-locate, add the other kind of marijuana, does not allow them to go beyond the usual non-conforming rules and, say, add a second floor or expand into another area of the building. That would not be permissible under the current language. Next major issue is signage. We have heard some direction concerning the ability of local law enforcement to be able to enforce some meaningful sign regulations. I will tell you the state regulations do address signage and advertising in a broader sense as well. They address not only things that would be germane to signs, but internet advertising, radio advertising, print advertising, and I included the state's regulations concerning advertising so you could see the extent of those and how far the state goes. There was still a desire, as we heard, to have some ability to locally control and enforce those regulations that the state also has that really could affect things like signage and visibility in the community. So in that vein, we adopted and included in this draft what the current state regs are concerning the prohibition of advertising in places that are visible to the public, visible from public sidewalks, streets, parks, etc. That prohibition is contained in the current ordinance. So that provision would, for example, prohibit the sign twirlers you see on corners. They couldn't do that for marijuana businesses. Leaving leaflets, I think someone mentioned, on your car unsolicited, that would be prohibited. Handing a leaflet to you on the sidewalk, things like that would be prohibited. Billboards, mobile signs on vehicles, those would be prohibited by this local provision, and would permit your police department to enforce those instead of having to call state marijuana enforcement division and say, hey, we've got an issue in Wheat Ridge, can you come down and enforce? Also, part of the state sign regulations that we've incorporated into this ordinance that we thought might be helpful or desirable to enforce locally, prohibition of signage appealing to minors, a prohibition of signage that is deceptive, false, or misleading. And we heard policy direction to add a couple additional items to sign restrictions that are not contained in the state regulations, and those were no depiction of a marijuana leaf and a limitation of the size on a green cross from a total area of 2 feet by 2 feet. I will tell you, at least the communities of Denver and Boulder have adopted almost verbatim as well those portions of the sign, the state sign regs that concern public view, the sign twirlers, things like that. So Wheat Ridge would not be alone if you decided to adopt those substantive requirements locally. And finally, to make that work, we added a requirement that a sign application actually be submitted with the business license application for one of these. We need a way to check what kind of signage is being proposed. The final policy issue reflected in the ordinance is really a reflection of a policy issue already made. It is essentially a cleanup of the recent ordinance that adopted the International Building Codes, which you all will recall. Some amendments were made to those ordinances to regulate marijuana-related occupancies. And among those changes that were made on second reading were certain permissions made or concessions made to allow manufacturing activities and the extraction of hash oil involving not only water but non-combustible solvent-based extraction methods. One of those references, and it's a reference in the International Mechanical Code, I think was simply missed. So we still have a prohibition of all solvent-based extraction in that IMC. In this ordinance, we thought while we were at it and we noticed it, we should clean that up to make all the international codes consistent. So that's the last policy issue I wanted to touch on, big picture in the ordinance. Then a few policy issues were not addressed in the ordinance, and I wanted to address those briefly as well. One was that there was some discussion about investigating the possibility of adopting local packaging restrictions, taking maybe like signage, taking some of the state packaging regs or other ones, who knows, and having those requirements be imposed and enforced at a local level. I included with my memo to you the state regulations concerning packaging so you could see the extent to which the state regulates that activity right now. And staff felt, after looking at those extensive regulations, that the state's getting there and really doing their best, I think, to adequately address those. Those regulations continue to evolve. New rules were adopted that were effective at the end of October concerning packaging. The legislature is slated to continue talking about how manufacturing and packaging is going to occur at the next legislative session. Those regulations are going to continue to evolve. So staff felt that not only did we perhaps not have the time and availability and expertise to apply the state's pretty technical regulations, those regulations were going to continue to change, certainly over the next year, maybe even longer. As the industry evolves, I think, and innovations occur, as with any industry, we'll probably see packaging and ideas about how to manufacture things that we never thought about 6 months ago, and 6 months hence will be the same. So there is not provision in the ordinance currently concerning packaging because of that. Another policy issue not addressed in the current ordinance is the discussion was had about establishing one type of city license for both retail and medical manufacturing activity. This is akin to policy issue previously discussed that is reflected in the ordinance concerning permitting one type of business to add the other type of marijuana to co-locate without having to go through an onerous process. The idea, however, of having one license and coming up with one license for both activities, as we were thinking about it, staff sort of struggled with how would that really look, how would that really play out, because the state still does require each type of manufacturing activity to obtain a different state license. So folks will have to continue to apply for each kind of a license at the state level, certainly. So we didn't think it would be too surprising or difficult for applicants to simply do that to the city as well. But then we also thought, well, if the idea is to permit folks to add that other kind of activity to their manufacturing activities, I think the other provisions of the code currently allow that. Again, the express language that's in the current draft that allows co-location to occur even when the original location is rendered legal non-conforming. Explicit language that says you may co-locate in an existing location even if separation requirements that would apply today wouldn't permit you to locate a new store there. So if the idea is to permit the co-location for manufacturing activities in areas where they currently exist, we believe that that is achieved by the current draft you see, without adding sort of a unified manufacturing license that has one name. We're also struggling with the fee and, well, which fee should apply? Should there be two fees or one, and which one should be the retail or the medical? And then, why just for manufacturing facilities? Why would they only pay one fee and other kinds of co-located not? So we saw a little bit of practical difficulty in creating one type of manufacturing license. Those are the issues that I wanted to address, Madam Mayor, so I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you, Carmen.
Mayor, we did have one other thing we wanted to present before we get into the questions and discussion.
Sure.
Lauren Mikulak, senior planner with the city, has prepared two maps. We've always kind of provided maps every time council has taken a look at modifications to the ordinance, and I'll let this get distributed before I just call out a few highlights of those maps I've got one. So there's two maps, they're stapled together. The first map pertains to medical marijuana centers and retail marijuana stores, so the storefronts. And then the second map, which we'll go over second, is pertaining to MIPS, the manufacturer of infused products locations. So a few things that are different about this map than the maps you've seen perhaps in the past, if you'll recall. We have always showed the 3/4 mile buffer, which is the circle that's drawn around the 5 existing locations in Wheat Ridge. One thing that we haven't done typically in the past when we've shown you maps, just because it's somewhat of a staff time-intensive effort, is going out to those adjacent jurisdictions. Council will recall that the separation requirements with 3/4 miles applies outside of our jurisdiction as well. So if there's a location in Lakewood that is proximate to our city boundaries, that 3/4 mile separation from that facility in Lakewood would still apply. So we have gone to the effort of showing you that in terms of the existing locations that we're aware of in adjacent cities, notably Mountain View, Denver, Edgewater, and Lakewood. So that's something that's new in this map. Two other things that are new that show there's a lot of shading, and of course shading means that those would not be permissible for new locations for marijuana facilities. But we mapped, of course, around the parks. So parks are shown in a shade of green, and city is proud to have a lot of parks, so there's quite a few buffers that relate to that proposed 1,000-foot separation from the perimeter of all those improved parks and, of course, the city's rec center. And then finally, in the past, when we've shown, we've had in effect for several years the separation requirement from residential daycares, drug and alcohol treatment facilities, schools, et cetera. We haven't been able to map those very easily because they were measured by the shortest walking distance, and that's a fairly arduous effort to try and calculate that in the field for literally dozens of those facilities. So we haven't shown you that on the maps. Of course, when an application comes in, we do that calculation, but we haven't mapped it for you during these meetings. So as Carmen mentioned, we have proposed for ease of administration and of communication, we have proposed to change to that straight line measurement. So we've shown those buffers on the map. Long and the short of it, as you'll note, the only locations being proposed, and currently is the case for retail centers and stores, would be in C1 zone districts. Those are shown in kind of the mauvish, reddish color. And really there would be, at this point, notwithstanding the cap that's proposed of 5, there really wouldn't, unless another existing store closes, be any real locations for additional stores, just based on the shading that you see on the map from those buffering and separation requirements. So again, I think the only place where in the future you might see the potential for an additional location, if and when there were less than 5 locations in the city for the storefronts, would probably be if either the location of A and B in the northwest part of town, where you'll see there's a decent amount of the C1 zone property that could be opened up, if you will, for a new storefront, if and when those locations were to go away. So that's kind of the takeaways for me from the retail map. And then if we go to the infused products map, map number 2, you can see there's 3 locations where we have existing manufacturing facilities. And manufacturing facilities, based on the ordinance that was adopted, I believe it was in July of this year, that restricted those to just IE zone districts. Previously, the infused products facilities could be located both in C1 and in IE. Council made the policy decision over the summer in adopting an ordinance that limited those strictly to IE zone districts. So the purple is where you see the IE zone districts, and you'll note that based on that quarter-mile buffering requirement, if and when the proposed cap of a maximum of 3 MIPS, which is what's in the draft ordinance, if and when one of those locations were to close up shop and let its license lapse, then there are a number of IE zone properties in the city that could be potential locations for stores that would meet that quarter-mile separation requirement. There are no buffers required from the MIP locations, so there is a fair amount more real estate that's available, again, if and when one of the 3 locations would cease to exist. So glad to answer questions on those maps as well, but we wanted to kind of show you how the ordinance as drafted plays out on the ground.
We're ready for questions?
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, in regards to the change in measurement method, I actually looked at some of our situations and measured the way they were measured, and by straight line measurement. I would agree that a straight line as a crow fly measurement is an easier and better way to do it, but by comparing the old method of measuring and the straight line method of measuring, it actually doubled in those cases, the distance. So I think that's really more of a policy change than it is just a measurement change. Well, that's my comment.
I wouldn't disagree. I'm sure that is the practical effect as well.
That is the practical effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just, I would just clarify that it's not just administrative from a staff perspective. It's really how we communicate potential sites to how they kind of determine what may or may not be an eligible site. So if a marijuana business were seeking out a new location and one of those 5 or 3 respective licenses were available, it's very challenging for them to go out and try and determine what piece of ground they might be able to pursue. So it is kind of a customer service feature as well.
I'm not arguing with the straight line method. What I am arguing with is that it in essence changes the distance so substantially that it's a change in policy rather than just measurement. And I don't recall council directing staff to do that.
And this is a draft ordinance, so fair enough. We made that call, and looking at, we've had experience using these regulations over the course of the past several years, and it was our professional recommendation that, based on what we've described, that was a suggestion we were making. If council doesn't agree with the policy impact in terms of how many parcels or property within the city is available, that's definitely a policy question that you should discuss and act on.
Okay, and then along the same line, on map number 1, we have circles that represent the 1,000-foot barrier as measured by the straight line method. And you can see how large those circles are. And on the map, the second map, you have circles that are much smaller. And do I remember correctly, that should be a 3/4 mile barrier?
That's a 1/4 mile for the MIPS.
1/4 mile?
Yep.
So a 1/4 mile is about 1,000 feet.
About 1,000.
It's about 1,300.
But these circles, as shown here, are much smaller.
The reason for that, generally speaking, is that because we're measuring from the perimeter of the property, and the physical footprint of the property of which the MIPS are located on is often much smaller than the physical footprint of something like a school or a park.
So how did you measure? You measured from the property line?
From the perimeter of the property.
So
in both cases.
So they should be concentric circles from each of the 4 corners of.
Mm-hmm.
So these circles really should be sort of oblong-y.
Yes, and I think if you look at them, I think they are.
I mean, depending upon the shape of the building.
Depending on the shape of the property. Yeah.
Property,
Mm-hmm.
right. Well, I see this as a change of policy more than just a change of measurement, although I do think that the measurement type is a smarter idea than the other way we had it. But I would ask council to adjust this for this difference in measurement by reducing the distance requirements. So, for example, the 1,000-foot requirement we could reduce to, I don't know, we should probably study and see what that equates to, but let's say 500 feet. Yeah.
We're not taking public comment anymore. As I said, we're not taking public comment now. This is the council study session. You're very welcome to be here. I believe I had a hand over there from Tracy, first of all.
I just have a quick question on the separation, because it's been a while since we first discussed the medical marijuana, and I remember there was I thought there was state limits about medical marijuana and distances by schools, and we as a city adopted that. Is that, and it's been a while, but that's what I remember it. Like when we first had medical marijuana come to our city, and we had the moratoriums over discussion, where when the state was still kind of crafting what that looked like for us. When we had when we had allowed medical marijuana to come in, I thought that our barriers, at least by school and hospital and such, were state measurements and not necessarily fine-tuned by us.
Carmen, can you help me out on that one? I think that's correct.
The state regulations included the 1,000 foot from schools, daycares, drug treatment centers. It did not specify how to measure it. So we started with the property line to building based on pedestrian travel, because that's what's in the liquor law. So it was our next best option. But as we've been administering that, it's become more and more cumbersome and hard to visualize.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's the way I remembered. I mean, so the 1,000-foot measurement wasn't an arbitrary number that we had taken. It was really a number that we kind of started with, but try to figure out the best and the best way to try to use the system. And it sounds like the measurement of walking is not as conducive to us or to the people who come to our city trying to figure out that distance. I'm not gonna say that I disagree or agree at this point at changing that 1,000 foot. This is what we started with. And that's kind of what we have on our books because of.
Okay, so on this map, the light gray circles here, those are your markings of 1,000-foot separation as the crow flies from, and I'm looking at the 38th and Miller site, from the rec center and from a daycare and schools. Is that correct?
From the rec.
This is, okay. So that's what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying in this map that if we adopt the 1,000-foot separation, that
1,000-foot buffer.
1,000-foot
yeah.
buffer from the rec center, that a site would not be possible at 38th and Miller. Is that correct?
Correct.
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Starker?
Mr. Johnstone, would it be your, I guess, tendency to, now that we're thinking about using a straight line method to determine distances from certain facilities, that we carry that standard through the other regulatory schemes that we enact that have a distance requirement in this city?
Such as
liquor?
Liquor.
Or whatever, I don't know what else. What sort of things do you
Right.
distance from, and will this now become the new standard for the city of Wheat Ridge?
I don't deal with liquor licenses directly, so I guess I'm a little cautious to speak on their behalf in terms of whether they've experienced that as being onerous or not. I don't know the volume of inquiries they get in terms of new liquor licenses and how frequently they need to kind of make that calculation and whether they'd feel that was burdensome or not. But certainly worth looking into if you'd like us to.
Is this the only one that the Planning and Zoning Department regulates?
I think, do we have a separation requirement in our mixed-use zone districts, we have certain separation requirements from drive-throughs, between drive-throughs of like kinds, so that would be the only other thing that I can think of. We have a separation requirement between car dealerships as well. So there's a few things, and generally they're measured straight line in the zoning code. That's correct. And I don't know if that goes back to state law in terms of the liquor laws, which are heavily controlled by the state.
In any case, if this would be, by accepting this draft, we're agreeing that is a policy change. However, that would apply mostly if one of these establishments or one of these locations was unoccupied for 6 months or more, then, and another person applied, another group applied, that's when that would particularly come into play. Is that what we're understanding here? Okay, I just wanted to make sure we all understood that. Mr. Fitzgerald again.
But in effect, what's happening here is that at least 3 and maybe more of our existing facilities are going to be turned into non-conforming uses, right? And those non-conforming uses are going to be reviewed every 6 months. And all that's required to reject a renewal would be a comment from a neighbor saying that it affects their well-being. There's no protection for the business owner here, and we're actually taking away the value of somebody's businesses, of at least 3 people's businesses, and maybe more, because if we measure a different way, some existing businesses that we hadn't considered as non-conforming may now be drawn as non-conforming. I don't know that because I didn't see that.
I think we need an answer to
I
that.
think just a clarification to that, Councilman. The 6-month period only clicks in terms of, let me back up. We would have 4 legally non-conforming retail centers and/or marijuana stores and/or retail marijuana stores. We'd have 1 that's actually conforming, the one in the northwest corner of town, location A on the map. Those 4 non-conforming locations are considered legally non-conforming, and they can remain in perpetuity, and in fact can be transferred to new ownership to the extent that they're not abandoned for a period of up to 6 months. So if they're abandoned for 6 months, then the legally non-conforming status goes away. But otherwise, they remain legally non-conforming uses and can remain in perpetuity, and in fact can be transferred subject to administrative review and approval. We're not taking anything away unless a use gets abandoned for a period of 6 months.
But Carmen, am I wrong? I remembered you talking about the right belonging to the person and not the site. So if a person who is the owner of a business dies or decides to retire or something and sell the store, that would no longer would be allowed, isn't that right? In essence, over time, at least 3, maybe 4 or more would be rendered inoperable or unlicensed.
I'm sorry if there was confusion on that point. No, in that instance, someone retires or just wishes to pass their business along, or maybe a family does after someone dies and is holding a license. Those licenses would be, or special use permits, let's call them, are transferable and would be transferable. They would, so I apologize if I misspoke on that point. What the ordinary rules of special use have options in terms of whether or not the special use permits are transferable automatically. In other words, whether they run with the land, or whether they're transferable only upon review and approval, or if they're just not. Some special uses can have a designated duration, a real finite period, after which, no matter who has them, they're done. All those options exist under current code for all special uses. In the current draft ordinance, what we heard policy direction was that indeed council wanted, at least for this initial draft, to consider special use permits for stores that were transferable, but only if there was an administrative review and approval process. So they can be transferred in those instances.
But in looking at the renewal process, let's see, all somebody has to do is come in and say that it has a detrimental effect on my general health and welfare. There's no objective.
I don't know if you, maybe community development wants to address how special uses are, how you manage the criteria, but the code does say, I'm not going to get the exact language for you, but essentially that the objection that let me back up. First of all, if a written objection is filed, it doesn't operate to deny the application or to stop its process of being considered by the city. It simply kicks that decision up to you, to council, as opposed to leaving it at the administrative level for staff. So it ensures that there is a public process that would be used. Folks would have the opportunity to comment on the special use if written objection is received. So the process becomes different. It's not a de facto denial. And the code does require that the objection pertain to essentially the criteria that are set forth in the code, the approval criteria, not simply, I just don't like this person. The code really tries to get folks and requires folks to articulate a reason that pertains to the code criteria for special uses: adverse land impacts, compatibility, noise, traffic, odor, glare, those kinds of things. Those are the required substantive objections that have validity under current code language.
But there's no proof, there's no objective proof required for that. It doesn't, I've got the list right here.
On the part of an objecting party.
Right.
And that would be, you're right. There's no requirement that they submit objective proof as a part of a written objection. That would, quite frankly, be something that they would have to present to you in the context of the hearing, and it would be up to you to decide, based on the evidence and testimony that they present, whether they're giving you valid, good objection based on proof.
I want to clarify a couple of things for intent, and then I think try to be responsive to what Councilman Fitzgerald is saying, and then if I'm wrong on this, because I want to make sure I'm clear on how the code is amended as written in this package. The intent, in fact, is to, in the case of transfer, whether it's a legally non-conforming use or, in fact, a special use that was conforming, had gone through a special use process, et cetera, that transfer could take place. And in what we're writing in Section 11, it's in Section 11 of this code, I think it's on page 12 or so, is that becomes an administrative process. Now, this is added because, in fact, in special use currently, it's not actually indicated. It only indicates that the business needs to kind of submit information, submit their new information, and that's all that happens. In fact, what we're saying here is the added piece is that we want to allow for a administrative internal review. Now, and if you read carefully under paragraph 2, and this is now on page 13, the last line, shall meet the special use review criteria set forth in section 26.114D. Section D is the criteria. Section A, B, C are the ones that call forth all the other things like the objection and all that. So this is not referring to objections and hearings and other things like this. This is giving direction, as I see it, as to how the administrative review, in the case of a transfer of a special use or a non-conforming legal special use, is going to occur. It's going to occur by staff looking at the criteria set forth in 26.114D and making a determination, and this gives them the right to do that administratively. It does not indicate, and this wasn't the intent, it does not indicate that this would in any way kick it back through sections A, B, C of section 26.114. Now, that's how that was my intent. That's how I read it here. And I think that if that's not clear, then we should clarify it. But to me, that's how I interpret what the intent was and how it's written.
I concur.
Yeah, that's exactly what the intent is. Again, in the context of talking about transfers of those special use permits.
Specifically for transfers, yes.
Not new applications, which again would have the opportunity for that special, to apply for an eligible site for a special use permit. But yes, that's exactly the intent with what was written.
And I just want to clarify briefly, there's sort of two statuses that we have as non-conforming businesses. So under the proposed ordinance, 4 of these locations would become legal non-conforming. That does not mean that they need to go through the special use process. So for all practical purposes, it may be that we never review a special use permit for these existing businesses. The only time we'd start to initiate the special use process is if one of these closed for a period of 6 months and another location, either in the same place or elsewhere, were to be opened. So these existing would be legal non-conforming, could be transferred totally separate and apart from that SUP process.
Genevieve.
I have a few questions here, but concerning what you were talking about, number E on the map I'm sorry. This is the one that, is that the one you're saying is non-conforming?
Actually, under the proposed ordinance, B, C, D, and E would all become legally non-conforming.
Okay.
Based on C, D, and E would all become legally non-conforming because they're immediately across from public parks. In that case, I don't think the method of measurement would matter based on that proximity. letter B would become non-conforming because of the method of measurement from that school that's to the southwest. So all four of those would be.
Okay.
A is the only one that would remain a legal and conforming location, but in an industrial zone district, we're not proposing that a store be a special use, so
Okay.
sort of off in its own category.
Okay. So, on our memo that we received here on section 2, it says, establish a cap of 5 total storefronts. So this is consistent with the number. So these are what you've got listed here. And then it says, the second bullet is establish a cap of 3 total manufacturing, retail, medical, and co-located. This is consistent with the current number of existing and pending. What is the pending?
Location X on that second map is not open for business. They're still in process in terms of, they've submitted their application through the sales tax division and would have to do complete building modifications in order to open.
Okay, so that is, can I say the name of the site?
What was the request?
Can I say the name of the site?
Yes.
Okay, that was the EBU site. So what my question is, going through some other parts of the memo here, on the very back on number 3, where you said establish one city license that authorizes both retail and medical manufacturing. This is separate from what was distributed to council prior from Mr. Pond from this. And so my question to council was, is this brought forth by somebody on council that wants it added? Number 3, where we're authorizing a retail and medical manufacturing and the co-location. Okay. I'm just wondering how it was separate from this, from what we were notified of before. So that was added in, that was separate. I'm not in support of that. I do believe it appears to me, unless somebody wants to discuss it separately, that it's being brought forward to accommodate one business, and I'm not interested in that proposal. It says the state has separate licenses. And so then we would be doing something different from what the state does. So that's one of my questions right there. And then I have another question that...
Is that question perfectly clear to everybody? I didn't think, Genevieve, can you repeat that, what you have in mind here?
That number 3 in the memo is separate from what was previously proposed.
This is our cover memo with our executive summary, okay?
That the city establish one city license that authorizes both retail and medical manufacturing activity. And that was not in this before, so I believe it should be addressed separately from this entire proposal. So that's my comment on that.
So if we make a consensus, you would like to have that separated?
Yes, and I was curious how it got brought forward. And Mr. Johnstone explained to me earlier that it was his impression and his direction that it be added. So,
Excuse, just help me out. Is this section number 3 and there's 4 bullet points on it and it's number 2 on the memo? Okay, because I'm looking at section 3, going over here to the back. Okay, so there's section 2, section 3.
Make all current marijuana centers, is that the?
it's
So this
the
is
item
under
regarding...
additional- This is number 3 under additional
Right,
comments.
right.
Oh.
So I'd like to propose that be discussed separately from what our original discussion was. And then my other question is, if I'd like to propose, and I have a question, that could it be added that council is notified when any license comes in or when there's any administrative review, and not that council would take action, but that council's notified, because this is a very new process. The public is very concerned, and when I get calls and they say, hey, what's going on with this address, I have no idea, and I've not been notified, it is infuriating. And so I would like council to be notified when either a license is applied for, or there's changes, or administrative review. In other words, I would like to be notified if something's happening and not be told after the fact of an administrative review.
Certainly. Mr. Urban?
To Councilmember Wooden's point, I think that addresses a very specific issue and an issue that affected a lot of people near 30th and Miller. And almost all members of council would be in the same boat as well, that we did not know that buffer had disappeared due to that particular shop closing and then leaving that particular property open for business, so to speak. And so I would want to take that a step further, that if a business closes, or I don't know about the transfer, but if it closes or these buffers change for some reason, that triggers some kind of 6-month or 12-month moratorium on any new applications, to give us the time to analyze these types of buffers to make sure that this type of situation doesn't occur again. Give us that breathing room to say, if a business goes out, that we have a 6-month moratorium that kicks in place, and it gives us that time to address these issues, instead of what we were faced with here, which was an unknown entity wanting to put a pot shop in a neighborhood. And I think that had that been put in place previously, we wouldn't be facing some of these issues. And so I would agree that notification specifically, and then I would put forward some sort of automatic trigger of a moratorium if one of these buffers disappears or is modified, so that we have that space to work. Because again, based on testimony, we don't need any more pot shops. We may not even need the ones we have, but they are here, and so we have to deal with them as they are. And putting it to a vote of the people sounds like a great idea to me, but I want to make sure that we're not left flat-footed, and that's how I felt flat-footed in dealing with this issue, because I wasn't aware that application was made, that staff was meeting with the pre-applicant, what have you. And so to keep that from happening again, having that trigger, and I don't even know if that's possible, but I would like to at least consider that.
So you would like notification, in addition, have a moratorium of 6 months or so. Let's have some more discussion on that, because with the rules that are in place, the moratorium may not be correct. Let's see, I had Tracy over here.
I was just going to say that I don't necessarily agree with the automatic. I mean, I'm all about moratoriums, and I find benefits with them, especially over the years with trying to come to terms with what marijuana does and its impact on our community. I get that. But I don't want to necessarily just kind of jump the gun and put moratoriums into place. I'm more, I do agree that we should have some notification, because I think that all of us felt very unexpectedly surprised by a reaction by citizens to an event we weren't aware of. I would like to protect that on us and make sure that we're aware of something's going on. But I think that when that act of awareness, so when we know it's happening, that gives us the right then at that point to decide, do we want a moratorium? Is this something that, we then have that time and we can put one in place. And we've obviously been able to put an emergency one in place before. So I don't want to put into ordinance ever an automatic moratorium. I don't believe that that's good practical use of our time, but we can, with knowledge, react in a positive way.
Thank you. George?
I support the notion of notification. I'm not sure how that would get drafted in here, or if it's required to be, strictly written into the code or not. That would be one question, but I certainly support the concept that we're notified. I wouldn't support an automatic moratorium, and I don't say that because I don't agree with the need to be poised to make decisions and all that, because in fact I do agree with that. However, I believe that the special use process has enough deliberate thresholds within it, both on the staff side and from the public side, that will act in a sense to do that. So I'm going to trust the special use process for that, I think that's a fair way.
we're working here tonight, we're looking at this draft and we're creating changes to it. So I'd like to finish that one up. Do I have a consensus that we have, and then we need to go back to the policy system. Do we have a consensus as far as notification that a shop, you know, what you're requesting? Can I get a consensus on that?
We haven't even spoken.
Oh.
Mr. Chula, you'd like to speak on this?
A couple things. First of all, for the record, I never suggested that pot shops and barber shops were the same thing. I don't know where that came from. It came from somebody on council, but it wasn't from me. Now, secondly, I agree that notification is necessary when the ownership's going to change, or not ownership, but the boundaries are going to change. But I don't think we need a moratorium every time that's going to happen. But I think notification when the boundaries change and there's a possibility of other locations being affected. But a moratorium would be overreach, in my opinion.
If I may clarify, I believe its boundaries would change because a store has closed, another one wants to open, and it might be in a slightly different place. This is why we're discussing boundaries?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I guess I could use some clarification too, because there's a lot of things that occur. You know, what occurred, I guess, at what we call the 38th and Miller location was two things. At some point in time, an existing store at the strip center at 38th and Kipling closed, and that had impacts in terms of what might be a permissible location. That's a fairly, I guess, significant change. But then subsequent to that, you know, we had a pre-application meeting with an applicant, which is the first step in our general application process for land use applications, and that doesn't trigger any notification requirements, which was, you know, obviously a point of discussion as to should it or you know, shouldn't it.
Well,
but I guess what would be the different triggers for
my
providing
point I was
notification?
trying to make was when someone's going to apply for the special use permit in the future, that's going to trigger a notification, correct?
Sure. Yes.
So that's the kind of notification that we should have, that a special use permit's being requested. And so that could change boundaries if one closed and one moved, and that special use permit's going to be in a different part of the city. So that's going to trigger the notification that a boundary may change, correct?
There's two things there, though, right? There's a potential application for a new special use permit, and then prior to that, there's the abandonment of a store, I guess. And, you know, it has to be abandoned for a period of time for that special use permit to actually, that legally non-conforming status to expire. So, I mean, I'm not saying we can't be responsive to what council wants, but there's some nuances to it that we'll need to figure out.
Could we ask that council be notified of any administrative reviews regarding marijuana businesses? I mean, I don't.
Yeah. Well,
just that council be notified.
Sure.
That's what I'm wondering. If, you know, as far as, is their license going to change? Is something going to change within their business? Just that we're notified.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
That's kind of overreaching, but.
No, that's fine. I think as Lauren pointed out correctly a few minutes ago, I mean, under the existing proposed, right, draft ordinance, if you're a legally non-conforming use, that legally non-conforming use can be transferred. It's a land use entitlement, just like it would be for any other legally non-conforming use in the city, not related to marijuana. We can certainly notify council of that, but that transfer is completely an administrative, non-subjective process. So, right.
Okay, I think we had a consensus, which included notification. Mr. Sarker, you look like you have a question.
well, it seems to me like we're proposing to have a maximum of 5 storefronts, if you call them, and 3 MIPS locations. I mean, if one of those were to be abandoned for 6 months or more, and therefore be in sort of default of its special use, that's the trigger that I would seem that we would want to understand what was going on. You know, if there's some other, you know, I don't know that we need to be notified every time a detail happens in one of these stores. I do think we need to be notified if there's an abandoned or a potential abandonment of a location which may give rise to a transfer of the maximum of 5 number of stores or outlets that we have in our city, that's when I think we should be notified.
Well, for example, if we agree to this, you know, which I'm against, that if somebody wants to change their license in any way, I would like to be notified of that. Just notified. I mean, if I get a call from the public and they say, what the heck are you doing with this, then at least I would know something is different is happening with their license. But
Carmen, were you wanting to speak to that? I saw you turned your.
I think staff I'm sure would appreciate clarification on exactly the conversation you're having. Is what would you like notification of? Because as Ken mentioned, many things can change these buffers, and you know we're talking about whether or not one of these stores goes away or is abandoned, but you know the location of an additional daycare would affect the available areas. The location of an additional drug or alcohol treatment center would affect available space. There are, you know, schools, those don't pop up and go away often, but those are also things that could affect this map for you, council. And I think, you know, staff would want to know, would you like sort of a new map every time a new map is necessitated, or something less than that, like as you just discussed, if one of these stores goes away? Those are very different, I think, directions for staff.
So if a daycare or something moves into an area and then a location changes, that could be affected by it. So this is a little more complicated than, yeah, Mr. DiTullio.
Okay, I'll take a stab at this. I'd like to be notified as one council member on when a special use permit is being applied for or changed, and when the buffer changes and we get a new copy of the map. So with the map, so we'll know what's going on as far as transfers go or new places moving in, like Carmen suggested, and then when the special use permit process is engaged. That's my consensus.
If I could just.
add any
Yeah,
changes to a license.
we have staff here, what's logical for us here?
Well, what's logical for you is what,
Well, I mean,
what policy
what you
direction
can
you want to
do.
give us. But
Right, sorry.
and I don't want to dwell on the practical, but there's dozens, if not, closer to 100 of these different buffers on this map. And we don't necessarily have a system in place that the minute a business license application is not renewed for something like a home-based daycare, those tools in place to be super nimble in getting you updated maps on what could be, I don't know, certainly a monthly basis, I would say would be fair to say.
Okay.
Mr. Pond.
I think short of the map, and I do think that we should attempt to keep an up-to-date map, and I know that you would do that and transfer that to us in some appropriate timeline. And again, these things are not going to be code adjustments, so I'm hoping when this moves forward as we go into final draft that we might notate these requests for subsequent meetings so that we can just kind of check off. But I think some periodic updating of the map, not by instance, but by some calendar event at least. And then what I'm hearing, and I think I agree with this, is that that two things generally would trigger a notification. One would be the initiation of a special use application, and the other one would be a license transfer. So.
Is there a level of comfort with that? Okay. We have reached consensus on that then.
I have a different, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Wait a second, I have Mr. Fitzgerald right here.
I'm obsessed with this map, Ken. I see that you have circles around shops in Lakewood. How does the recent vote in Lakewood affect those shops?
I can't say if, okay.
Well,
so the shops that you see that are in Lakewood are medical?
Yeah.
And the vote in Lakewood was in regards to recreational.
Okay.
So medical marijuana shops are still allowed.
Thank you, Dan. Mr. DiTullio.
I just wanted to address one question. Carmen Berry earlier said that we weren't going to allow one application, that we were going to have two applications because the state requires 2 applications. So I'm confused on why that's an issue in here. What were you referring to that? It's my understanding we're not going to allow one application for medical and retail. It's going to be just 2 because that's what the state does. But is that just a part of the memo discussing it? Or I don't see where it's just okay, but we're not doing anything. We're not doing it, right?
It's not contained in the current ordinance. No, these last 3 points in the memo were policy issues that aren't reflected in the ordinance.
And that was discussed at some previous study sessions where it came up, and then it was referred back to this meeting when we had this meeting at some study sessions when Mr. Fitzgerald brought up. So we're not going to allow one application for retail and medical. It's going to be 2 separate applications still, correct? Okay, so we're good on that. The other thing was, I think that as the crow flies makes way more sense than trying to figure out to go around different buildings and sidewalks and buildings. And we've used that standard in the past, and I think that it's going to be more of a simplistic and smart way to adjust these in the future to say, okay, just go from property line to property line in a straight line. So I support the as a crow flies method of measuring this. And I think everything else in the ordinance looks pretty straightforward.
Mr. Urban.
With respect to testing facilities, are those included in that 1,000-foot buffer, or are those excluded from the 1,000-foot buffer?
Excluded.
Okay. Because I can see a situation near I-70 in Youngsfield where there would be a removal or relocation of a drug treatment center and or something happening with the shop in Lakewood that would cause a significant area of a pretty significant commercial area to be allowed to have a conforming use there. So
that's a good theoretical. So to play that forward, the things that would have, the process that would have to go through, one store would have to close, so we create an opening, drop below that 5 cap. The store in Lakewood would have to close, the daycare would have to close, and then you'd have to review a special use permit. Okay. So, and that would essentially be the process anywhere. Several puzzle pieces sort of had to shift, and you'd go through an SUP to allow a new location.
If I can clarify something, if a shop closed, or no, let me change it another way. If a daycare moved in, or any of the other areas, and a shop closed, a future shop coming in or close by would have to then have to consider that daycare or whatever. That's what I wanted to know. All right. That would be a part of reestablishing another store.
That's correct.
Under the 5 limit, or if within the 5. Okay, thank you.
is there, Madam Mayor, sorry, one more.
Sure, Mr. Urban.
With respect to the 6-month leeway that they have, is there some methodology or theory behind that? Why isn't it shorter time frame? Are there other methods that have a longer or shorter time frame than that? And what's the thought process behind a 6-month?
George, please, would you answer that?
I better, since in the normal SUP process, the duration is 1 year, and so that's the standard for special use. And the thought was, and again, many of these points, all of these points, are drafted through careful consideration, hearing a lot of input from many of the people in this room tonight. And in the consideration in this case is to essentially shorten that period of essentially non-activity. There's a specific term in the code that refers to basically not operating to a lesser amount without it being so punitively small that there's no reaction can take place. But it's really just an attempt to tighten the window on how we look at these things and when they fall out of their non-conformity status.
Okay. It seems if we have a consensus to accept the draft as it is, then there'll be other things that we have disallowed, which we have discussed. Do we have some more of those? Yeah.
I am in favor of the draft with the exception of this last part that talks about Co-location of facilities is permitted under Code Section 11-415. Language is proposed in this ordinance to make clear that co-location may occur even when the original location is now legal nonconforming. And language under proposed Code Section 11-305 and 11-416 should provide that separation requirements would not prohibit an existing legal nonconforming business from co-locating a business of the same type of activity. I am in support of the draft, with the exception of that, and I would ask that it be treated separately.
Do we have other support for Genevieve's request that that section be treated, that it be removed and we treat it separately?
I'd like to make a consensus that that section be treated separately because it was not part of the original memo.
Treated separately as another ordinance?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have some?
George's proposal.
Okay, I've never gotten that. I don't know, maybe you passed that out.
Yeah,
at a
he
meeting.
passed it out back in September. And that the majority of what is in this is from all this, with the exception of the packaging and the other items that she talked about.
Madam Mayor, quick clarification. So you're asking to split it out, have two ordinances come to city council and vote on it separately, correct? Is that what you're asking for?
Well, and I may ask, there's another way of doing it, I suppose, which is to just to say that if we can find a consensus on everything except this, we should find that consensus, and then we can discuss this item as a separate item, and whether or not it falls into a ordinance and that comes forward to us in the future or not, we can handle that. But what I'm hearing you say is that for right now, for the purposes of finding a consensus on it, that you're offering a consensus on all but this, and that we take that in hand, vote on that consensus, and then we can take this separate item separately, whether it's tonight or some other time.
Is that what you're asking for, Genevieve?
With the addition that we talked about of the notifications.
Okay.
To city council.
I think that they both should come forward. We need to put this to bed one way or the other. And I think that this choice was in there to support the current businesses that are out there. Isn't that what that's there for? I mean, where did this come from, the co-locate? It's to support current activity? Is that what this is?
Yes. To allow them to, have the, in the event they don't have a medical facility already or a retail facility, but they have an established one or the other, that they could amend that license and augment it to have the other half, whatever they're lacking.
Well, I support the consensus of bringing them both forward and voting on both of them at the same time. We're not going to find a consensus on anything. I mean, it should be just voted up or down so we can get this off the table and move on. So I would support bringing them both to the next meeting as a regular vote for first and second reading.
You're suggesting the separation as Genevieve has requested.
Yep.
I'm just would like to ask, who does this apply to?
To my knowledge, it just applies to the one business that was mentioned previously.
It applies to EBU and
I think there are a couple of stores that only have a recreational or a medical license, so it would apply to them equally.
So they'd be allowed to
Apply to have a co-located license. Practically speaking, we regulate medical and retail identically in terms of our separations and the zoning districts. So it would sort of put it under the same umbrella.
Ms. Langworthy had her hand up earlier.
So the EBU is a MIP. And the way I'm reading this, and maybe I'm not reading it correctly, and medical marijuana retail and all of it can get very detailed. So the co-location, is that for just retail and medical, or is it retail, medical, and MIPS? Because if it includes MIPS, then it would include the EBU. If it's just medical and retail, then it would not include EBU. So I guess I want clarification on that.
So there's two types of businesses that we recognize, MIPS, or an infused products manufacturer, and a storefront. And both of those two categories can have retail and medical. Because we regulate a retail and medical storefront and a retail and medical MIPS the same way, there were a few proposals in terms of how to treat them. Just call them one thing, so you're a MIPS license instead of two different types, or your storefront license instead of two different types. So the ability to co-locate your retail and your medical license would apply equally to whether you were in the MIPS category or the storefront category.
That's why I just want to clarify on that, because if without that knowledge, without knowing that MIPS have their own storefronts, because my understanding was that a MIP was just a manufacturer without the storefront.
That is correct, but what they manufacture, they still have to designate as either a medical product or a retail product.
Okay.
But they're not allowed to retail that from their MIP location, correct?
Correct. They can only be a manufacturer. Anything that is retailing, we would fall under the storefront category.
And does this ordinance provide that, that medical and retail marijuana is allowed only in a C1 district, or is it allowed in a 1E district also, or an E1, or other?
We allow MIPS in the IE zone district. We would also allow storefronts in the IE zone district, and have been.
We still have a consensus out there whether to separate these two. Mr. Fitzgerald, you want to discuss that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Before we vote on consensus, could I make a friendly suggestion? I'm confused by the language on page 3, section 2, A, number 7 and 8. Let me read from section 7. If the application is for a medical marijuana center license, there are less than 5 total current retail. To me, that's confusing. Shouldn't it? I'd like to suggest we change that to 5 or less, because less than 5 is 4.
Right, and so, so if this provision, and taken in context, is the authority to approve on certain conditions. So that's why it begins with if. And so one of the conditions is if the application is for a medical marijuana center license, there are less than 5 total storefronts. If we said there are 5 or less, that would permit 6. So that's why it's written that way. It could have said, or it can say, if you think it would be more clear, there are 4 or less. But if we said if there are 5 or less, then that would permit the 6th to locate. Just the way that this section is drafted already.
I see your point. It's still unclear to me. I'd like to find some other language that clarifies that, and the same applies in section 8 where you're talking about 3, less than 3. So.
Sure, and is it the less than language that you think is maybe confusing for folks? Maybe we should just say 4 or fewer.
It's just in the context of saying before that we're going to allow 5 and 3, that it just is confusing here to talk about less than 5.
Okay. And absolutely, point well taken. We can try to craft something that makes it clear that 5 is the max. Like perhaps if the application is for a center, then there are not already 5 or something like that that reiterates the principle that that's the magic number. We can work on that, absolutely.
Thank you. Actually, I found that confusing myself, so I appreciate your comment. Okay, can we get back to, this would be a part of that then. We didn't decide if we're going to have 2 separate, go ahead.
My request and clarification then for consensus right now is to, with the adjustments that have already been made about notification and about this comment that Mr. Fitzgerald just brought up, that I put forward a consensus to move forward with the code amendments that have been drafted tonight, with the exception, at least for this consensus, of the items that are indicated under the policy goals to provide a simple administrative process to allow established premises to add either medical or retail marijuana to existing operations, as indicated on bullet 3 of the staff memo, and that that, you know, is, the reason to do that is just to kind of say that we've taken the points that were given and the direction that we're given, and we vote on that consensus right now, and then we can bring up the other ones immediately after tonight for discussion and vote on those if we want to. But for the sake of clarity and getting to the points that we're driving the things that we keep clear to those first. Just ask for consensus on those topics exclusive of these.
Is everybody comfortable with that? Do we understand it? Can I show of hands on a consensus? Okay, 1, 2. All right, we're good. Mr. Urban?
There was one element in here that.
Which, no.
On page 11.
Okay.
It talks about the signage for a retail location. My first question is, how many retail locations do we have existing that are not co-located with a medical license? Do we have any retail that's not co-located with a medical sales? Do we know?
I think we have one, but my list is from October, so.
I guess my concern is for the retail, it talks about that they're permitted to have a green cross in their signage, but that to me would be false or misleading advertising in the sense that that's not medical. It's retail, and to advertise with a cross, that somehow suggests there's some medical element to that. So I would caution against allowing that, just because it doesn't seem as though that jives with what retail is. It's not medical. I think that that's something that it suggests something that it isn't. But I don't know how many of those situations we're going to come across. But I look at options medical, and unless you know what's there, you're not going to be. It's not going to be in your face. So I think that if someone is looking to purchase marijuana, they know where they're going to go. That the signage and whatnot can be done in such a way that diffuses the impact on the community. So specifically related to the retail side, I don't see the purpose in allowing a green cross in those situations, in the sense that they're not a medical situation.
Ms. Langworthy has a comment.
My understanding is a retail can only be permitted with a medical to begin with. I thought they had to be co-located.
I think only in the first instance for the first, was it a year of when?
Okay,
the
so
first
there
year
was
of
a time
state
limit
level,
on that
there was
one.
a
Okay,
period under which you could only.
Okay, because I remember initially that there was that discussion that they had to be co-located. So now you could have a freestanding retail without a medical. Okay.
Mr. DiTullio, I had first.
Isn't it true that this co-location was not just for one business, for a MIP, but it was for any business that's currently in the city? They could have, say they're retail, and they want to add a medical component. This would allow that to happen at that site.
Correct.
So it's not just one business. I know there's businesses in the city right now, establishments that are either retail or medical, that want to add another component to their site. So this co-location allows that, not just for one business, but for all of them.
Right.
Is that
Yeah,
true?
and my apologies, because I think Lauren corrected me that she has a little more intimate knowledge of some of the licenses. We think there's probably one MIP and 1 or 2 storefronts that could desire to take advantage of that principle.
Ms. Langworthy?
So now we're talking about the co-location. Okay. I would be okay with co-location to the extent that if it's a retail store that does retail and wants to add medical, or a medical store that wants to add retail. But I don't believe, at the heart of a MIP is not a retail front, that I don't believe co-location of a retail to a MIP is appropriate because it's a manufacturing facility, and to me, that's it's a different beast. It's manufacturing, and we put that in IE for a specific reason, and retail and marijuana can be in either or, but our retail and medical can be in either or, but I don't really want to see storefronts to our processing plants that we have in, and that would be my problem with.
We're probably doing a bad job of describing a complex issue, but what we're proposing, and this is governed to some extent by state statutes, but you're correct that MIPS, whether they be retail MIPS or medical MIPS, so whatever kind of infused products they're manufacturing for, whether it be for the medical industry or for the retail industry, they cannot have a retail storefront associated with that manufacturing facility. But what we're proposing is that both a MIP, whether again it be existing medical or existing retail, and it wants to add another manufacturing facility that addresses the second one, that you do that. And then on the corollary, if you have an existing retail storefront and want to add a medical storefront, that you could do that and vice versa.
And I think
Okay.
Yeah, that's,
Okay, I think that was kind of the heart of our confusion.
The confusing thing, I think, is that in state statute, recreational marijuana is called retail marijuana. So
Okay.
when we say retail, we've been meaning recreational marijuana, the product, not retail, the storefront activity.
Okay, so for MIPS, if they're producing medicinal MIP, then co-location just allows them to do retail MIP, but not have a storefront where they can sell. Okay, then I'm okay with, because I think that the fear was that a MIP might be allowed to have a co-location storefront, and we don't want that happening.
So is this different than what the state allows?
This is a local issue, I would say. I mean, what we're doing is consistent with state statute, but it's a more localized issue in terms of how we're treating existing facilities in our jurisdiction.
Okay, and I guess that's my question, is that EBU had their medical license, and then they said they wanted their retail or recreational, and they hadn't done the paperwork correctly, so this lets them get around that. And that's my issue with this.
okay. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Well, this is another case where they communicated with staff early in the process and were told one thing. And later that was pulled back and said that that was all wrong, that they couldn't do that. So I think we kind of owe that to them, that we made that mistake. That's our mistake. And the effect on the ground is nothing. That is to say, nothing changes in the way it looks, nothing changes in their business. It's just a matter of who they can sell to.
Wait, they're a manufacturer, right?
I think we should get off of one business because, like I mentioned earlier, if they have retail sales or medical sales in their retail or medical shop, they can also co-locate, and that's what some of them may want to do in the future. So this isn't just about one business, right? It's about the 5 we have that they're going to be capped.
It's about more than one business, yes.
3. Well, it's 5 or 3 because it's going to affect anybody who wants to have both.
But it's MIPS. MIPS is only.
No, it's 5 because it affects them all. But it also affects the retail and medical storefronts.
Correct.
Yes. So that's all of them are going to be affected by this one way or the other for the co-location.
But are we doing something different than the state does?
No.
So the state allows co-location, so we're adding this so that we can accommodate one business.
No.
We're adding it for any business.
That's kind of how that got initiated.
Wasn't the moratorium a part of that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So my consensus would be that we move this forward as a separate ordinance, the co-location piece move forward to the dais along with the other ordinance. That's my consensus to be voted on.
Are we ready to do that? Are we through discussing this? Is it clear what we're moving to the dais and what were we at this point? Everybody's clear?
You want to vote or our hands?
Didn't you already vote on that?
This is
on we
the
voted on
co-location piece.
This is the second portion. We voted on the full draft first, and now this is the item number 3, right?
Yeah, so my consensus is to move the collation forward as a separate ordinance.
Right. Okay, we've got a consensus on that. Are we done with this discussion then? I believe we are. George, thank you for your work on this, tremendous. Thank you, Genevieve, and a lot of people out there who helped with it as well.
Yeah.
I haven't officially, Excuse me, sir, we haven't actually closed the meeting. We have not adjourned yet. But we're going to. So we're going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.